Hey, I want to point out just a couple more things. We got a lot of kind of like pieces to kind of get through today because it's our first week. But inside of your zine is one of these cards. And there's a couple things I want to point to. The first one is every week we want to do a little bit of a poll of our community to get to know our community a little better. This week's question is on page 1 of your zine. This one's just a little light lifting to get us started, okay? So what is your favorite music supergroup from the 90s? Okay, so you've got some options there. And some of you weren't alive in the 90s, okay? So you can just select definitely not one of these if that's you, okay? If you weren't around back then. But you'll see here on this card are just a few commitments that we can make each week. And one of the things that we know about growing in our walk with Jesus, taking steps towards Jesus, is that doesn't normally happen by accident. It happens through some intentionality. One of the things we know about building community with one another is that doesn't necessarily happen by accident. It happens through intentionality. And so each week, and I promise nobody's gonna hold you to any of this, but each week you're gonna be able to kind of look at this list and go, you know what? I'm gonna try a few of these or one of these and maybe check that off and put your name and your info up here. And we're just going to track with our community through the summer to see how we're doing as a greater community, be able to talk with one another about some of the commitments we've made and some of the things we're learning. And so you can have a look through that card. And on the back side, there's a spot to put notes. So those could be thoughts you have from the book of Ruth. That could be a question you have. That could be, maybe a complaint you have. We'll put those in our complaint box under my desk. It's round and has a bag inside of it. And anyway, anything you want to put here, when those come in, we'll be reading through these cards each week as a staff and continue to help our community move together through the summer. As Aaron mentioned, this week we're going to be looking at the book of Ruth. And the idea for this summer is that we're going to have these 9 different books. Each week will be a different book of the Bible. And what we want to encourage you to do is on Sunday, you'll get to hear one of us kind of teach about it or frame up the book for us. And then we want to encourage you to go home at some point this week and read the book for yourselves. Now, some of you are readers and you're like, that's no problem. That's rather exciting to me. Some of you are maybe not so much readers. And so we very intentionally set this up for you. All of these books are the shortest books in the Bible, okay? Actually, this first book, Ruth, will probably take you about 12 to 15 minutes to read. It's really a consumable book of the Bible. You could sit down at some point later today or this week and read through the book of Ruth. But I do want to warn you that if your perspective on the Bible, that the Bible is full of these very maybe simple stories, maybe your expectation on the Bible is that there's always a clear hero and a clear villain. Maybe you read the Bible and you think about it, you know what, it's a book with one morality, and we just need to read it so we know the moral thing to do. I just want to warn you, Ruth, the book of Ruth will disappoint you in all the best kind of ways, okay? It will disrupt so much of how we understand the Bible and maybe the way some of us read the scriptures. This story of Ruth is incredibly complicated. So here's what we're gonna do today is we're actually gonna move through the book of Ruth together. I'm gonna do my best to kind of tell us a story, give us a little bit of background information, and maybe help us understand the story so that when we are home this week reading the story of Ruth, we're not melting down in our house filled with confusion, okay? And so here we go. We'll start at the beginning of Ruth. So Ruth opens up this way. During the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. A man with his wife and 2 sons went from Bethlehem. Bethlehem literally means the land of bread. So a man and his 2 sons went from the land of the bread of Judah to dwell in the territory of Moab. I just want to say this first sentence, if I could just sum it up for us, I could say it would be like during the time the judges ruled, things were really bad. People were leaving the land of the bread, of Jerusalem, of Bethlehem, to go and dwell in the territory of Moab. What you also might not see in this, that Moab had a very complicated relationship with God's people in the land of the bread. They were enemies. They were maybe they were kind of like frenemies. If you read through the scriptures, there's all these moments where God's people battle with Moab, where they struggle with one another. And so for them to go and dwell in the land of Moab meant things were really, really, really bad in Bethlehem. The name of the man was Elimelech. Elimelech. Everybody say Elimelech. I practiced saying that a lot this week, and the Lion King helped. Elimelech, Elimelech. Okay, so that'll just kind of help you out there. The name of his wife was Naomi, and the name of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. It probably is more appropriately said like Killian, like the beer, okay? And so Killian, they were Ephrathites. That's a tough one to say. From Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the territory of Moab and settled there. Again, things were really, really bad. As we continue reading the story, in the beginning of this story, what happens in the book here is that Elimelech and his sons, they all die in the land of Moab. And so all that is left is Naomi and her two daughter-in-laws, and they're living among the Moabites, and Naomi says to her two daughter-in-laws, who are Moabites themselves, says, you should go back and live with your family. Back in the day, like way back in this day, women had no rights. Women had very little opportunity to care for themselves, to make money, to be able to support their lives. And so Naomi says to her daughters-in-laws, like, I can't support you. You should go back and live with your parents. Go back and live with them so you can be taken care of, because isn't this so that you don't starve during this famine. And Naomi says, I'm going to go back to Bethlehem, to my family where I'm from. Ruth is one of those daughter-in-laws. In verse 16 of chapter 1, Ruth says this to Naomi, don't urge me to abandon you, to turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, Naomi, she says, I will go. And wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Ruth looks at her aging mother-in-law and says, absolutely not. I'm not going to leave you to try to figure this out on your own. I'm going with you back to Bethlehem. She makes this commitment or this covenant. Those of us who have made these kinds of commitments before, maybe those of us who are married or have kids, you make these commitments, or maybe you committed, maybe you even experienced inside of a job, you committed to work somewhere, and then you don't even know what that commitment means until you're into it. And then once you're into it, there are moments in life where that commitment gets challenged, doesn't it? Naomi and Ruth have this relationship through the rest of the book of Ruth. So they get back to Bethlehem, picking up chapter 2. Now Naomi had a respected relative, a man of worth, through her husband from the family of Elimelech. Okay, there it is. His name was Boaz. Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field, first to the field, so that I may glean among the ears of grain behind someone whose eyes I might find favor. So if you were ever to try and read through the Bible from cover to cover, you'd eventually get to a book of the Bible that is really, really, really boring, okay? It's just a lot of rules and laws and rules and laws. It's probably the book where you stopped and you gave up on reading through the Bible in a year, right? And so you get to this book of the Bible, and it's all these laws that God's people had to follow to be a society. One of those laws is that God's people were instructed not to harvest their entire field, but to leave the edges of the field unharvested so that the poor could come and harvest the edges of the field and still have some food. That practice was called gleaning. And so here Ruth is going to glean in the fields. Naomi replied to her, go, my daughter. So she went and arrived, and she gleaned in the field behind the harvesters. By chance, it happened to be the portion of the field that belonged to Boaz, who was from the family of Elimelech. Then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, and he said to the harvesters, may the Lord be with you. So there are people working in Boaz's field. He says to them, may the Lord be with you. And then they say to him, may the Lord bless you. It would have been a common greeting among God's people at the time. Boaz said to his young men, the one who is overseeing the harvesters, says, to whom does this young woman, check this word, belong? To whom does this young woman belong? What you might not notice is it would have been visibly clear that this woman was not from Bethlehem. but she was a Moabite. So if a Moabite woman is in the fields in Bethlehem, it must be the property of someone. Are we following the story here? So who does this woman belong? The young man who was overseeing the harvester said, well, she's the Moabite woman, the one who returned with Naomi from the territory of Moab. She's the one that you've probably heard about. This Moabite woman who pledged her allegiance, her covenant, her commitment to our sister Naomi. She said, please, now this is Ruth speaking, please let me glean so I might gather up grain among the bundles behind the harvesters. Boaz said to Ruth, haven't you understood, my daughter? Don't glean in another field. Don't go anywhere else. Instead, stay here with my young women, my young woman. There are kids in the room, and so from here on the story, I'm going to try and hide some pieces of this story inside of some language that they won't understand. Hopefully, you will. In this time, wealthy households, wealthy men had women that were often referred to as concubines. They were there to serve the head of the household, however the head of the household deemed necessary or appropriate. Do I need to say more? Okay. So what he says is stay among my young women, stay among the women who I possess, and keep your eyes on the field where they are harvesting and go along after them. I've ordered the young men not to assault you. If you can just understand the vulnerability of this immigrant Ruth in the fields in Bethlehem, that she is so vulnerable in this moment that Boaz needs to give instructions to his employees not to assault her. Order the young women not to assault you. Whenever you are thirsty, go to the jugs and drink from what the young men have filled. She bowed down, face to the ground, and replied to him, how is it that I have found favor in your eyes that you notice me? I am an immigrant. Boaz responded to her, everything that you did for your mother-in-law after your husband's death has been reported fully to me. How you left behind your father and your mother in the land of your birth and came to a people who hadn't known you beforehand. May the Lord reward your deed, he says to her. May you receive a rich reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to seek refuge. Ruth said to him, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, sir, because you've comforted me and because you've spoken kindly to your female servant. Now this next line goes, even though I'm not one of your female servants. I listened to a scholar talk about this text and they're reading through it in the kind of original language this week. This is one of the things you might not pick up in the English translation of this story is that the text turns a little bit flirtatious. Ruth is kind of like, well, you've spoken kindly to me, your female servant, even though I'm not one of your female servants, is kind of how it would read. And then it continues. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, eat some of the bread, dip your piece in the vinegar. They have this little date. He responds to her flirtatious gesture and says, why don't you come and share a meal with me? Their first date, they sat alongside the harvesters, and he served roasted grain to her. She ate and was satisfied and had leftovers. When Ruth goes home to Naomi, and she shares with Naomi about this moment that her and Boaz had on the side of the field. You know, I can imagine her like telling this story, you know, like she's like, you know, I kind of like looked at him a little cute, you know, and I kind of just like hinted that, you know, like maybe I could be one of your women, okay? I mean, just a different time, different place, okay? Bear with me. This is like pre the feminist movement. So I just like roll with me here for a minute. And she says, but he like had dinner with me and he was so sweet, and he gave me bread, and he sent me home with all this food for us. And Naomi and Ruth, they begin to come up with a plan. Naomi says to her that tonight Boaz, this is chapter 3, will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. She says, you should bathe and put on some perfume and wear nice clothes, and then go down to the threshing floor. Don't make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Uncover his feet is a euphemism. Feet in the ancient text of the Bible is not referring to the organ that has toes on it. Uncover his feet refers to the nether regions of a male. You might know from the book of Revelation, when the angels of the Lord appear, with 2 wings they cover their faces, and with the other 2 wings they cover their feet. Not feet. They're covering themselves, right? So Naomi says, go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Ruth says to Naomi, I will do everything you're telling me. So she went down to the threshing floor. She did everything just as her mother-in-law had ordered. Boaz ate and drank, and he was in a good mood. Guys, I'm telling you, this story is complicated, okay? He went over to lie down by the edge of the grain pile. Then she quietly approached. This is like the romance package in the ancient Bethlehem world, right? Over by the grain pile. She quietly approached, uncovered his legs, and lay down. During the middle of the night, the man shuddered and turned over, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. She replied, I'm Ruth, your servant. Spread out your robe over your servant because you are a redeemer. What's she saying here? She's saying, I want to be one of your concubines. I want you to save my life. I'm incredibly desperate. I'm so vulnerable in this famine as a young immigrant woman. And the woman I'm trying to take care of is one of God's people, but she is elderly and female during this famine as well. She's reaching out in desperation to Boaz. So I will be one of your concubines. Can you just take care of me? And he says to her, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have acted even more faithfully than you did at first. You haven't gone after the rich or the poor young man. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I'll do everything for you that you are asking. So she lay at his feet till morning. Then she got up before one person could recognize another, and he had said, no one should know that the woman came to the threshing floor. He said, bring the cloak that you have on and hold it out. And she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and placed it upon her, and she went to town. She came to her mother-in-law, to Naomi, who said, how are you, my daughter? How'd it go? Right? So she told Ruth everything the man had done for her, and she said, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, and he said to me, don't go away empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Sit tight, my daughter, Naomi replied, until you know how it turns out. The man won't rest until he resolves this matter today. So then we get into the last chapter, the last section of the book of Ruth, and it begins with this kind of like legal mumble jumble. So here's what Boaz says to Ruth, is that actually there is another man in town who has the first right of refusal on Elimelech's possessions. And so he goes and meets with this man and says, she's seeking ownership in a household. Naomi and Ruth is. Will you be their redeemer? Will you take them in and take on the possessions of Elimelech? And he says, sure, I'll do that, and I'm happy to kind of take care of Naomi and make sure she has what she needs. And then Boaz says to this man, well, it's not just Naomi, you'll also have to take the possession of Ruth as well, because Ruth is a descendant of Elimelech through marriage, right? And he goes, oh, never mind then. I can't afford to also take care of Ruth. And so then Boaz, in the text here, goes through a legal process to becoming the redeemer of Naomi and Ruth. So it goes on here. Boaz announced to all the people, today you are witnesses that I've bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech. It goes on to the end of the story. This is how the story finishes. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. He was intimate with her, and the Lord let her become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Naomi took the child, verse 16, Naomi took the child and held him to her breast, and she became his guardian. So Ruth has this child with Boaz, and they take this child and they give the child to Naomi. So this story is meant to just echo this faithfulness of Ruth towards Naomi. Not only was she willing to become the concubine of this man to take care of Naomi, but she ends up marrying Boaz and has a child with Boaz, and the child that they bear together, they present to Naomi, that this child would be her kin, that she would be the mother of this child. And the neighborhood woman gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. And this last line means incredible things for God's people. And he became Jesse's father and David's grandfather. That's King David's grandfather. So this story would have been told for generations among God's people, that this immigrant woman that was a Moabite, who was like an enemy of God's people, pledged her faithfulness to Naomi in some really uncomfortable ways. And eventually the story ends with them having a child. And that child ends up being the great-grandfather of King David, this king that God's people for generations would have heralded as this gift from God, as this incredible leader in their history. And where this story gets even more interesting is if you've ever sat down and read the book of Matthew, it begins with a genealogy of Jesus, who is a descendant of King David, who is a descendant of the story of Ruth. I hope this has not ruined how you read the Bible. As I was working through this story this week, I really wanted to turn it into a series of teachings. I actually have 6 sermons I'd like to preach now. And I think I'm going to try and preach all 6 in the next 4 minutes. Are you ready? Are you ready for this? Sermon number 1, the Bible has context. And we might want to read the Bible as this flat book. We might want to read the Bible as simply this moral document that gives us instructions on how to live in this world today. But the Bible has context, and these stories are complicated. And so it's so important when we look at the scriptures, when we understand who God is and who we are and how we relate to God, that we understand that these stories have context. Sermon number 2 is that your life has context too, doesn't it? That as we read through this story of Ruth, we're reminded that the complicated parts of our life don't just happen in a vacuum, that your life has context. There's a moment in this story I didn't read today, but when Naomi comes back to Bethlehem, people are like, Naomi, you've returned. We're so excited to see you. And she says, don't call me Naomi. She says, call me Mara. See, the word Naomi means pleasant, but the word Mara means bitter. She says, I walked away full and I've come back empty-handed. Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Her life has context. You know what's incredible about the story of Ruth? Nobody ever calls her Mara. She only ever gets called Naomi. Sometimes maybe in your own life, you feel like there's been some complicated seasons and some contexts that have maybe caused some shame in your life, some bitterness. God never calls you Mara. He still calls you Naomi. Your life has context. Sermon 3, their life has context too. I think this story reminds God's people for generations and generations and generations that God doesn't create caricatures. It's so easy to look at our enemies in a caricature. It's so easy just to frame them up how we would like to imagine them so that we can hang on to our hatred, so we can hang on to the things we hold against them, so that we can hang on to the divisions and all the reasons why we are not like them or we are better than them or why we judge them for the ways that their life has unfolded. Can I just remind us today from the book of Ruth that their life has context? Can you imagine if Ruth was your neighbor and the kinds of things you might think about her if you didn't know her vulnerabilities and her context? Your life as context, sermon 2, their life as context, sermon 3. Sermon 4 is there's a difference from sinning from a position of power than sinning from a position of vulnerability. I had someone last week in the lobby come up and ask me, like, I'm really struggling with this idea that all sins are the same. And what I said to them is like, well, from the perspective of grace, all sins are the same. But from the perspective of reconciliation in your community, all sins are not the same. There's a difference. From the perspective of grace, grace abounds to cover all of the things you've ever done and left undone. But that does not free you from needing to reconcile within your community. See, Ruth reminds us that while maybe she laid at the nether regions of a man that she was not married to, that in the context of her life, that's very different than what will come in the neighboring books of King David, taking advantage of a woman based on his power. And we read the Bible, we're invited into much more contextual thinking around how sin works in our world, are we not? Sermon number 5 is that many years later, the great, I think one more, great grandchild of Ruth or Naomi was a man named Solomon who built the temple in Jerusalem. There are 2 pillars in front of the temple. They both have names. One of those pillars he named Boaz. He named Boaz. The name Boaz means in him is strength. Sometimes I wonder if maybe the point he was making is that the temple of God is a refuge for the vulnerable. The temple of God is a place where the vulnerable should be able to come and run and find strength in the pillars of Boaz in this temple. Pastor Josh walked through last week how the temple has moved from a building in Jerusalem into the body of Christ, the people. And there's a sermon here somewhere for the 5th sermon in Ruth, that we must learn to recognize ourselves as people of strength for those running from vulnerable situations. Sermon number 6 is finally that while this story begins in famine and death, it ends in new life. The story doesn't end in famine and death. It ends with a baby who begins the lineage of David and ultimately the lineage of Jesus. Ultimately, I think what this story of Ruth calls into question is like, what do we do? What do we do when our life completely falls apart? Like, what do we do when things don't work out how they're supposed to work out? What do we do when the pieces of our life don't fit into the boxes that we expected the pieces of our lives to fit into? What do we do when the pieces of the lives of our neighbors don't fit into the boxes they were supposed to? What do we do when the faith we grew up with doesn't fit inside of the box of the faith we grew up with? What do we do when everything falls apart? And what might be frustrating to you about the book of Ruth is also something that's really hopeful about the book of Ruth, is that God never gives Naomi an answer to this question. And believe you me, I think Naomi had this question. But what the book of Ruth does is it shows that God gives Naomi a future. The promise of God is not answers necessarily in the midst of our struggle, but there is a promise of a future. Let's sing together.